A boy stands alone on a beach. Behind him, his village is gone. In front of him, the ocean is calm and quiet. It is the year 1945. His country has just lost a war. His city has been destroyed. Almost everything he knew is gone. Most people in this moment would give up. But this boy, and millions like him, did something the rest of the world did not expect. Within one single generation, this broken, defeated nation would rebuild itself into one of the richest, most advanced countries on Earth. This is not just the history of Japan. This is a story about what the human mind can do even after everything is lost. And by the end of this video, you will not only understand how Japan rebuilt itself, you will also learn powerful English words and phrases that describe resilience, discipline, and change. Let's begin. Japan is a chain of islands in the Pacific Ocean, far from the mainland of Asia. For thousands of years, this distance shaped everything about Japanese life. Early Japanese communities, known as the Jomon people, lived on these islands more than 10,000 years ago. They fished, they hunted, they lived close to nature, and they lived apart from the rest of the world. Slowly, small farming villages grew into larger communities. These communities grew into clans, and these clans, over hundreds of years, grew into something bigger, a nation. By the 6th century, a new idea arrived in Japan from China and Korea, the idea of a strong central government led by an emperor. The emperor was seen as a symbol of unity, but real power in many periods of Japanese history did not stay with the emperor alone. It moved to a new class of warriors. These warriors were called samurai. The samurai lived by a strict code of honor called Bushido, the way of the warrior. This code demanded loyalty, discipline, and courage. A samurai was expected to value honor more than his own life. For almost 700 years, powerful military leaders called shoguns ruled Japan in the emperor's name. Regions fought each other for land and power. This period of conflict is known as the Sengoku period, the age of warring states. It was a violent, unstable time. But one man believed Japan could be united. His name was Oda Nobunaga. Nobunaga was ambitious and ruthless. He used new weapons like guns brought by Portuguese traders to defeat his rivals. He began the long, difficult process of bringing Japan's warring regions under one rule. He did not finish the job. He was betrayed and killed by one of his own generals. But his vision did not die with him. A second leader, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, came to continue the work of unification. He came from a poor farming family, not a noble one, and rose through sheer skill and determination to become one of the most powerful men in Japan. Still, unification was not complete. That final step belonged to a third man, Tokugawa Ieyasu. In the year 1600, at the Battle of Sekigahara, Ieyasu defeated his rivals and became the undisputed ruler of Japan. He established the Tokugawa shogunate, a government that would rule Japan for the next 250 years. 3 men, 3 different paths, one shared goal: unity. There is a famous saying about these leaders describing their different characters. If a bird will not sing, Nobunaga would kill it. Hideyoshi would find a way to make it sing, and Ieyasu would simply wait patiently until it sang on its own. That patience, that willingness to wait for the right moment, became one of the defining features of Japanese leadership. And it is a lesson worth remembering in your own life, too. Sometimes success does not come from force. It comes from patience and from choosing the right moment to act. Let's slow down for a moment and picture daily life during this era because it helps us understand where Japan's national character came from. A samurai's day was built around discipline. He trained with the sword for hours. He studied calligraphy, the art of beautiful handwriting, because a warrior was also expected to be educated. He practiced control over his emotions because panic in battle could cost not just his life, but the lives of his men. This combination, physical skill, mental discipline, and emotional control, was not seen as three separate things. In Japanese thinking, they were one thing. A well-trained mind and a well-trained body were considered inseparable. Below the samurai, farmers, merchants, and craftsmen each had a defined place in society. Life was structured, hierarchical, and in many ways extremely demanding. But this structure also created something valuable: predictability and a shared sense of purpose. During the Sengoku period, this structure nearly collapsed. Castles rose across the countryside as regional lords called daimyo fought for territory. Villages were burned, alliances were made and broken within a single season. For over 100 years, ordinary Japanese families lived with the constant threat of war on their doorstep. It is important to understand this chaos because it makes what happened next even more remarkable. Out of more than 100 years of near-constant conflict, three determined men, Nobunaga, Hideyoshi, and Ieyasu, did not simply win battles. They built something that outlasted them, a system of order stable enough to last for 2.5 centuries. That is the first great lesson buried inside Japanese history. Order is not the natural state of things. Order has to be built, deliberately, often out of chaos, by people willing to outlast the chaos around them. Once Ieyasu secured power, the Tokugawa shogunate made a historic decision. They decided to close Japan off from most of the outside world. This policy was called Sakoku, the closed country. For over 200 years, foreign trade and travel were almost completely forbidden. Japanese citizens could not leave. Most foreigners could not enter. Only a small, controlled trade continued with the Dutch through a single port. Why did they choose isolation? The shogunate feared that foreign religion and foreign power would create instability. They had watched other Asian nations lose control to European colonizers, and they wanted to protect their own independence. So, for over 2 centuries, Japan turned inward. Inside this isolation, something remarkable happened. Japanese culture did not stop growing. It deepened. Art, theater, poetry, and craftsmanship flourished. This was the era of beautiful woodblock prints, of the tea ceremony, of highly skilled artisans who spent entire lifetimes perfecting one skill: a sword, a piece of pottery, a garden. This intense focus, this dedication to mastering one skill completely, became a core part of Japanese identity. The Japanese word for this spirit of craftsmanship is shokunin, an artisan's relentless pursuit of perfection, not for money, but for the sake of the work itself. Isolation, in this case, was not only a weakness, it was also a kind of discipline, a boundary that allowed a culture to focus deeply without outside distraction. Consider the story of a single family of sword makers during this period. For generation after generation, the skill of forging a blade passed from father to son. Each sword could take weeks to complete. The steel was folded and hammered thousands of times, not because it was necessary for strength alone, but because the process itself was considered a form of discipline, almost a form of meditation. This is a very different idea of success than many of us grow up with. It is not about speed. It is not about doing the minimum to get a result. It is about total, patient commitment to one craft, sustained over an entire lifetime. Meanwhile, in the cities, a vibrant, self-contained culture was blooming. In Edo, the city we now call Tokyo, merchants and artisans created a lively urban world of theater, fashion, and popular art, even though they had almost no contact with anything happening beyond Japan's shores. 250 years is a long time. Generations were born, lived, and died without ever seeing a foreign face, without ever imagining a train, a telephone, or a steam engine. But the world outside Japan's shores was changing quickly. In 1853, an American naval officer named Commodore Matthew Perry sailed a fleet of warships into Tokyo Bay. His ships were unlike anything Japan had ever seen, powered by steam, armed with modern cannons. Perry's message was simple and forceful: open your ports to trade or face the consequences. For over 200 years, Japan had lived by its own rules, isolated and self-contained. In a single afternoon, that world ended. Before we continue, think about this for a moment. Have you ever had a moment in your own life where everything you believed was suddenly challenged? A moment where the old way of doing things simply stopped working? That is exactly the moment Japan faced in 1853. What happens next is one of the fastest, most dramatic transformations in human history. Keep watching, because this is where the real lesson begins. Perry's arrival exposed a painful truth. Japan's old weapons, old ships, and old systems were no match for the industrial power of the West. The shogunate, weakened and humiliated, could not hold on to power for long. In 1868, a group of young reformers overthrew the shogunate and restored power to the emperor, a young man named Mutsuhito, who would become known as Emperor Meiji. This event is called the Meiji Restoration, and it marks one of the most extraordinary periods of change in world history. The new leaders of Japan made a bold decision. Instead of resisting the modern world, they decided to master it. They sent students and officials abroad to study Western science, engineering, medicine, and law. They invited foreign experts to Japan to teach new industries. They built railways, factories, and modern schools. They created a national army and navy modeled on the strongest military powers in Europe. In just a few decades, Japan transformed from an isolated agricultural society into a modern industrial power. This is the moment where the word adapt becomes essential to understanding Japan. To adapt does not mean to lose your identity. It means to change your methods while keeping your core values intact. Japan did not become European. It absorbed Western technology and Western systems, but it filtered them through Japanese discipline, Japanese values, and Japanese identity. Think about the scale of what was actually happening. In the year 1868, most Japanese villages had no railways, no telegraph lines, no modern hospitals. Samurai still wore swords in the street as a symbol of their rank. By the early 1900s, within a single human lifetime, Japan had its own steel industry, its own shipyards, its own universities teaching Western medicine and engineering, and a navy capable of competing with the great powers of Europe. Entire government ministries were built from nothing. Thousands of young Japanese men and women left their homes to study abroad in the United States, Britain, France, and Germany, then returned home to teach what they had learned. Foreign engineers were invited to Japan on short-term contracts specifically to train local workers, and then deliberately sent home once Japanese workers no longer needed them. This detail matters. Japan did not want to depend on foreigners forever. The goal was always to learn quickly, absorb the knowledge completely, and then become self-sufficient. By 1905, Japan had grown strong enough to defeat Russia, a major European power, in war, the first time in modern history that an Asian nation had defeated a European one. The world was forced to see Japan differently. But this new strength came with a dangerous temptation, the desire for empire. Over the following decades, Japan's military expanded aggressively across Asia and the Pacific, leading eventually to Japan's involvement in the Second World War. This chapter of Japanese history includes decisions that caused enormous suffering, both for the people Japan fought against and eventually for Japan itself. By 1945, the war had turned catastrophically against Japan. Cities were destroyed by bombing. In August of that year, atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, killing hundreds of thousands of people and leveling both cities almost entirely. On August 15, 1945, Japan surrendered. The nation lay in ruins. Its cities were ash. Its economy had collapsed. Millions of its people were homeless, hungry, and grieving. Tokyo, once a sprawling capital of millions, had lost huge sections of its housing to firebombing. Food shortages were severe. Families searched through rubble for anything that could be sold, traded, or rebuilt. An entire generation of children grew up not knowing a version of their country that was not broken. This is the boy on the beach from the beginning of this video. This is the moment of total loss. And yet, this is also where one of the most remarkable recoveries in modern history begins. In the years following the war, Japan rebuilt, not just its buildings, but its entire economic and industrial system. Several forces drove this recovery. First, there was an intense national focus on education and skill. Even in poverty, Japanese families prioritized learning, and Japanese workers approached their jobs with the same relentless dedication to craftsmanship, that same shokunin spirit that had defined the country for centuries. Second, Japanese companies adopted and improved manufacturing methods, focusing obsessively on quality and continuous improvement. A Japanese term for this philosophy is kaizen, meaning change for the better, a commitment to constant small improvements over time. Companies like Toyota, Sony, and Honda, founded or rebuilt in the difficult years after the war, applied this philosophy relentlessly. What began as small, struggling workshops in Tokyo grew within a few decades into global industry leaders, respected around the world for reliability and precision. Consider Sony. In 1946, a small group of engineers began working out of a bombed-out department store in Tokyo, repairing radios with almost no equipment and almost no money. Within 25 years, that same company was producing the transistor radios and televisions found in homes across the entire world. Or consider Honda. Its founder began, after the war, by attaching small motors to bicycles, simply to help people travel through a country where fuel and transportation were scarce. That small idea, built on necessity, eventually grew into one of the largest automobile and motorcycle manufacturers on the planet. These were not overnight successes. They were built slowly, year after year, through failure, correction, and relentless improvement. The same Kaizen philosophy applied every single day on every single production line. Third, Japanese government and Japanese industry worked closely together, targeting specific industries for growth and investing heavily in infrastructure, education, and research. Fourth, and this is easy to overlook, there was a deep cultural belief that hard work itself carried dignity regardless of the job. A factory worker checking bolts on an assembly line and a company president were both expected to bring full effort and full attention to their work. This shared standard, applied across an entire society, is part of what allowed recovery to happen so completely and so fast. By the 1960s, Japan was building high-speed trains and exporting advanced electronics. By the 1980s, Japan had become the second-largest economy on Earth, an extraordinary rise for a nation that just 40 years earlier had been reduced to rubble. This transformation is often called the Japanese economic miracle. But it was not really a miracle. It was the direct result of discipline, focus, and an unwillingness to accept defeat as a permanent condition. So what can we learn from more than 1,000 years of Japanese history? We can learn that isolation, patience, and deep focus can build a strong foundation, like the centuries when Japanese craftsmanship deepened behind closed doors. We can learn that when the world changes suddenly and everything you know stops working, the right response is not to resist reality, it is to adapt quickly without losing who you are. And most importantly, we can learn that total loss does not have to be the end of the story. The boy on the beach in 1945 had lost his home, his city, and his sense of safety. But he did not lose his discipline. He did not lose his willingness to work. He did not lose the belief that things could be rebuilt. Multiply that boy by millions of people, all making the same choice at the same time, and you get one of the greatest national recoveries in human history. Whatever you have lost in your own life, a job, a relationship, a plan you were building toward, the history of Japan offers a simple, powerful reminder. Rebuilding is always possible. It requires patience, it requires discipline, and it requires the decision made every single day to keep going. That is the story of Japan. From an isolated island nation, through war, through devastation, to one of the most respected economies in the world. If this video helped you understand English a little better and gave you something meaningful to think about, please consider subscribing to Fluent English Mindset. Every subscription helps us keep bringing you stories like this one, stories that build both your English and your mindset together. In our next video, we will travel to a different country with a different story of struggle and triumph. Until then, keep learning, keep practicing, and remember, whatever you have lost, you can rebuild it. I will see you in the next video.